Welcome everyone to Special Education Legal Fund's September webinar on outplacement. We have a great panel for you tonight and we're really excited to get started. My name is Christine Lai and I'm Executive Director and Co-Founder of Special Education Legal Fund. Before we begin, I'd like to thank tonight's featured sponsor, Villa Maria School in Stamford, Connecticut. Villa is actually celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, so we're really excited to celebrate that with them. Villa is an independent school for students with specific learning disorders and an approved private special education program in Connecticut. Villa provides a small, supportive learning environment for a smart and creative community of students who have struggled in traditional school settings. First of all, on that note, I'd like to welcome and thank our 2023 corporate sponsors. Their generous support makes this webinar program, as well as so much else of what we do, possible. I'd like to acknowledge WealthSpire Advisors at the Platinum level, Winston Preparatory School at the Gold level, and at the Silver level, we are grateful for the support of Fusion Academy, Villa Maria School, Eagle Hill School, American School for the Deaf, and Chapel Haven Schliefer Center. Finally, we are incredibly grateful to Shrub Oak International School, the Pinnacle School, and Spire School at the Bronze level. Thank you again to our 2023 corporate sponsors. We could not do what we do without your support. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Special Education Legal Fund. Special Education Legal Fund was founded in 2018 to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. Since then, we have provided $800,000 in grants for legal support to over 200 families across 70 school districts in Connecticut and Westchester County, New York. This is primarily through two grants programs, the Legal Assistance Program and the Advocacy Support Program, both of which are currently accepting applications. Our next deadline is October 15th for applications and October 22nd for interviews. The Legal Assistance Program, which some of you may be familiar with, provides families in need with up to $6,000 in legal support from a qualified special education attorney. The Advocacy Support Program, on the other hand, provides families in need with $1,000 in advocacy support from a qualified non-attorney special education advocate. For more information, you can visit our website, www.spedlegalfund.org, and click on Apply for a Grant. Or you can go and do this cool QR code, scan the QR code here, and that will take you right to the Apply page. I obviously discovered QR codes this week because this presentation has like 4 of them. So I beg your indulgence. As I was saying, our next event that I want to highlight is our upcoming resource fair on October 1st at the Stamford JCC. We're going to bring together just about 50 vendors who are supporting special needs and special education families. We're really, really excited to have this. These are special education attorneys, schools, therapists, providers, recreational groups, and we're really, really excited to bring everybody together for the community. Those of you who know me know that I have wanted to do a resource fair in Fairfield County for about 15 years. So this is a culmination of a really long project and dream for me. So I'm really, really excited, and I hope to see you all there. As I said, these are our sponsors again. And as I said, Sunday, October 1st from 2 to 5 at the Stamford JCC. It's free for parents and caregivers, and Jumpstart is going to provide a sensory space for children if they need the space and are overwhelmed during the fair. So just wanted to let you all know that. My last commercial, I promise. It's our 5th anniversary. Special Education Legal Fund is now 5. And we are really, really excited to celebrate this year and to mark that anniversary at our 2023 gala. We will be honoring the legacies of President George H.W. Bush and Governor Lowell P. Weicker of Connecticut for their contributions to both special education and the disability rights movement. To learn more, here's my QR code, and that will take you to the event website. Finally. So we're really, really excited to have Meredith and Courtney join us tonight. Unfortunately, Andy Feinstein is ill and wasn't able to join us this evening, but these two powerhouse attorneys will more than make up for Andy's absence, I know. So our first member of the panel is Meredith Braxton. Those of us who live near the Greenwich area know Meredith and her special education law practice well. Meredith is a strong and vocal presence in the special education legal community, particularly in our neck of the woods. And this is your 4th panel for S.E.L.F, I think, or 5th, something like that. Anyway, welcome back, Meredith.
Thanks.
Next, we have Courtney Spencer. Courtney has been a longtime friend of S.E.L.F's, and we are really pleased to welcome her to, I think, our second webinar panel, maybe third. Courtney has extensive experience representing parents and students, and has many years, I think over 20, as a tireless advocate of disability and special education rights for families in the state. So welcome back, Courtney. And because this wouldn't be a webinar without a disclaimer, this webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. Families in need of legal advice, support, or assistance should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in Connecticut or New York to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund of any of its representatives, of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear in this panel. So here we go. What is outplacement? I have a bunch of questions here because this is a webinar that we've done quite frequently. It is a very hot topic. It's very important to parents. And so these are some of the, the questions that we're going to be covering this evening. I'm going to unshare that now. And, I think, one of the things, what I'd like to start off with, kind of right off the bat is, what is outplacement?
You want me to kick it off, Courtney?
Absolutely.
Go right ahead.
So I mean, technically it's really out of district placement. That's what we would call it, in the process. And it's when a child, either by the school or by his or her parents, place that student in a non-school district program. So that can be a specialized school, day school, it can be a therapeutic day school, it can be a residential school, but it's one that is not affiliated with the school district itself.
Perfect. Courtney, would you like to add to that? Do you want to, we can kind of go into all different types of outplacement. Like, what are different types of outplacement? I mean, Meredith has alluded to some, but, what do they sort of look like?
Sure. Yeah, I think Meredith described what an outplacement is, but specifically it can vary. So it can be a private school for kids who are dyslexic, a school for children who are on the autism spectrum, and it can go all the way up to intensive residential programs for either psychiatric needs or severe disabilities, and pretty much anything in between. And there are approved schools. Those are private schools that have chosen to be on the state's approved list, and then they have to follow a bunch of different rules to be on that list. And there are schools that have chosen to not be approved. And that doesn't make them any less qualified or less, professional for your child. They can be a little harder to get from the school district. And then, it's not outplacement to say a child's in a psychiatric facility. A school district has to even provide tutoring in those circumstances. So it's a whole variety of different options. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Can you talk a little bit about, you alluded to this with the, the approved school and the non-approved school, and, obviously there's differences, or maybe not obviously, maybe we can talk about the differences in placement to those two schools and, and how that, kind of works.
Sure, I don't know if you want
in terms of like a PPT placement. We're really going to dive right into it. A PPT placement versus a unilateral placement versus mediated settlement. Maybe we could talk about sort of those kinds of placements.
So if what districts claim is that if it's a non-approved placement, they cannot place through an IEP, although I have had some districts disagree with that and place through an IEP. And as
and what the statute says is that, you just have to establish that there is no appropriate placement that's approved in Connecticut. And then you can go to a Connecticut one that's not approved. And if there's no approved or not approved in Connecticut that's appropriate, then you can go out of state and they can place, but they will never admit that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it. These things we know are true. Meredith and I probably roll our eyes internally and externally at a lot of PPTs. At the end of the day, what we want for our clients, though, is to get the outplacement. So it is easier to get non-approved schools through a settlement agreement than it is through an IEP. Again, it's not impossible. It's just not quite as common. So very often, unless the school district agrees to the outplacement, you are doing a negotiation. Sometimes that involves cost sharing. Sometimes it just involves the district wants to keep the settlement quiet for whatever reason. But approved schools tend to be a little easier.
Mhm.
And then out of state, that's a whole different layer of fun, I should say. But nothing's impossible,
Yeah.
right? Nothing's impossible, really. And we'll get into this later. It depends on the strength of your case. But if I think anything to add to that, Meredith?
Yeah. I mean, and then there's different ways of getting there. There's via the IEP, having the school district place your child in an out of district placement. Then there's a unilateral placement where you say to the school, I reject the IEP, it's inappropriate, it denies a free appropriate public education. So I'm placing my child at X school to get an appropriate education, and I expect you to reimburse me. And that sets up a reimbursement claim that you can then later pursue. And then there's always going to due process to force a placement, which is always the toughest and riskiest route to take.
In the unilateral placement, how does that work with, if you could explain for our, our viewers, how does that work logistically for the parent? It sounds like if you're asking for setting up a reimbursement claim, that means that you have to pay the tuition to the school that you're unilaterally placing to. Is that correct?
Sometimes. So I have a situation right now where the private school understands that we are working towards a settlement agreement, and they are letting the student start. But the most important thing that if anybody walks away with is you have to give 10 business days notice in writing. And again, not giving legal advice, but you have to lay out certain things, or you do potentially lose your right to reimbursement, or you have to have requested placement and said you were going to place at the most recent PPT. So that's where parents can get jammed up. I'll get a client who didn't have an attorney. The child's been outplaced for 2 years. They never gave proper notice. We make a whole bunch of arguments as to why they really didn't have to, or didn't, whatever it is, comp ed, and we work through that. But that's the process of doing it. And then yes, you can, otherwise you can pay the tuition and fight for reimbursement. Of course, you can always do that.
Okay. That's
or you could I apologize, but you can do mediation first and then place, and then the school district's going to make the payments to the placement, because there are a lot of parents who cannot afford to make those payments up front.
For sure. Let's, can we, I'd love to back up a little bit and just talk about, from sort of ground zero. My child is having difficulty in school. How do I know how do I determine if my child's a candidate for outplacement?
That's a good question.
A really open-ended question.
I mean, so the question is, have you gotten everything you can out of the school, to remediate your child's needs? Has it been completely unsuccessful? And it's, if you've been trying and you're not getting success and your child is not making progress, then it's time to think about an out of district placement. And that can be either because the school district's being recalcitrant about giving, the services that child needs, or that they just don't have what he needs.
Or the provision of services is not adequate.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and then the other question is there a school that does meet his needs or her needs? Because, sometimes there's a set of sort of abilities and disabilities that just is hard to fit into a program that's out there. Those are very difficult cases,
And sometimes I would just dovetail on that. I have a handful of clients that never tried the public school, so it is possible.
Right. I've done that too.
Yeah, the schools are less likely to want to love that, but you build your case and you show that this is a student based on history who cannot be educated at the public school, because attorneys like Meredith and I wouldn't have taken the case in the first place. If it was just a parent who had a weak case and just really wanted a private school. We measure our cases and we make the determination that yes, this is a case for outplacement. And then we build that case if it's not already built.
Right.
And then you don't have to necessarily let the child fail. And I think some attorneys disagree with me on that, but I tend to say, okay, if it's time, it's time, and even if
be a requirement of failure in order to, to be in a situation where there's the proper support being provided, it's not, that's not, in anyone's best interest for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes, when you have a client whose child has not attended the public school, sometimes the public school will commit like fatal procedural errors, and that will give you your case. I won one against Greenwich because they wouldn't evaluate their own resident.
Yeah.
And that was just completely contrary to the basic law that I gave them. And so
gotta love a fatal procedural error, always helpful
very helpful.
Very helpful in that case.
Wonderful.
But that is that's a common, that's a common, I don't want to call it a fallacy, but it's a common belief that parents have that, their child has to fail in the public school, first in order for them to, be successful in an outplacement scenario. So I think that that's great that, and it's, really helpful that the two of you have clarified that.
But I do want to say, if you have a client where they haven't been in the public school, you do have to get them onto the public school radar.
Right.
You have to do a referral to
have to be evaluated, have to, go through, get the IP.
You have to do all of that, or you don't have a case. So
yeah. I mean, that's a pretty basic thing, for us, which is, in our program, as you both know, we are only taking those cases where, where students already have an IEP because the legal protection is there, and we, quite frankly, don't have the resources to provide cases. So, families to support child find cases or whatever, unfortunately, but that is an important decision. You have to be in the system, and be, kind of, active and in the system. So, I mean, starting from, you're a parent and your child is, sort of, has an IEP. The IEP is like maxed out, your child cannot get any more services in the day. There are, their day is stuffed full of every single kind of, service that they can have. And they're still not making progress. And you, as the parent, have identified that there's a school that might be able to, because of the way they provide services and the whole milieu of the educational environment, that might be better for your student. Talk to me about how you start that process as a parent, like from, what do I need, assuming that I'm not going to unilaterally place my child into this, into this other environment. How do I start my process of establishing that my child needs an outplacement?
I'll jump on that, and if you want to jump in. So as Meredith said, there's a million ways to skin a cat, million ways to do this. But the most important thing is if somebody comes to me and they're like, it's probably our most common call. I feel like my child's not making progress. I feel like they need something different. So I always say you need to do like 3 things at the same time. Number 1, you need to start researching schools, and that involves visiting them, looking at the population, because I can send two families with identical kids, and one family loves the school, one family hates the school. So you need to be starting that process, because it is they only set up visits at certain times. They only, it takes a while to go through the application. So you're starting that train. Your second train is to get an evaluation. If you don't have an independent evaluation backing you up, it's not impossible. It can be harder. And then the third is any outside supports you have. So if your child's receiving private PT, OT, tutoring, whatever it is. So it's like building the evidence piece of it, which is, okay, the school's saying everything's fine, Mary's fine, we're all fine. Yeah, that's what we hear every day, all day. in certain cases, the evidence is so clear, I don't need an outside eval. They were reading, their scores were in, like their GORT was at a 10 and now it's at a 2 and it's declined over time. They're not meeting their SBAC. They're, they have failing grades, whatever it is. Those cases are what we'd call easy cases, right? Like the evidence is blatant. Most cases are not so clear. The district maybe didn't do the right kind of testing to even show there was a problem, or they do their DRAs or their iReady, which, most people can pass whether
Their
they have
FMPs.
right. Yeah. It's like so you don't have the evidence and you have to build the case. So it's really getting as much independent information as you can to launch that case, because this is about money and ego. If it was just about money, cases would be easier to settle, but it's about money and ego. So a district's got to say, I'm willing to give you money, and I'm willing to say we were wrong in some way to give you that money. Two very hard things to fight against.
Right.
That's one of the other things that you really need are the records. You need good records from the school district. You need to keep after them to get like data, progress data. They'll give you crap and you have to follow up and get the not crap. And so that's, and you might, depending on what the sort of discussions were and the actions on the part of the school district, you might need to get like some of their emails, which would involve like going to the Freedom of Information Act to do. Because our Bureau of Special Education interprets educational records to not include
all emails.
Emails, although other electronic records are educational. I don't understand their dividing point, but
well, it's like some emails are okay. Like some, I mean, I've always seen that's like some emails are considered part, and some of them.
Yeah, it's great when they don't give you any emails, and then in their due process exhibits, there's
500
cherry picked emails, so that's fun.
What kind of data are we talking about here? And because data is like, it's such an amorphous term, so like what kind of data is most supportive of a case for outplacement? And my sort of secondary is how do you know that data is that data is good or usable, because they're taking it, you don't know how it's being taken, how do you know that what's the right data and whether you can use it in this instance?
I think it's very hard to answer that question, because if I have a child with behaviors, then it's the behavioral data. If I have a child who's dyslexic, it's the reading data. If I have a child who's ADHD, it's going to be the grades, it's going to be the behaviors. So the best,
everybody has behaviors. Let's, like the,
right,
pretty
right.
much, it's like if you're not doing well in your school environment, you're having behaviors because the environment's wrong, which is like very, but I hear what you're saying for sure.
It's either I always say they're either internalizers or externalizers, and I prefer the externalizers because the internalizers are self-harmers. The externalizers may throw tables, but at least they're
out there on record.
That.
Absolutely.
Know what's going on.
Absolutely.
And school districts are motivated to outplace them.
That's right. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Sometimes.
And I say to parents, sometimes I had an externalizer myself. And I will say, that sometimes when, I get this question from parents, it can be something as basic as like, how many times has the school called you in a week? Like you can see that very easily. It's like, how many times they called my cell phone to either have me come pick up my child or tell me something's going on. Those are sort of, very, independent, kind of data, markers that you can, you can say, well, the school's called me 15 times in the last like 2 weeks, something's clearly like.
And screenshot that, because they're going to not take a record of that. And restraints. And a lot of times especially your behavioral data is junk. They're measuring the wrong things at the wrong times and the wrong intervals to make a really pretty plot graph. And also with reading, it's so subjective if you are not trained. If you're doing, Orton, Gillingham, or Wilson, and you're not certified to do it, and you're saying, okay, they're at book 6, and then you get an independent eval is like they're reading at a preschool level. So I definitely, I'll let Meredith go more into that, but you really have to have somebody who can interpret the data. That's what I recommend.
So, but one of the things I like to try to get is, you get IEP progress reports that say, oh, he's mastering everything, he or she is mastering everything. And I want to get that mastery, the underlying mastery data, so that I can cross-examine their people. Because it may be a lot of times the mastery criteria is very amorphous and could be superficial depending on how they interpret it, to give those marks. And, so it could say 3 out of 4 times he or she will do X, Y, Z. And then you get the data and you find out, well, he or she did it exactly 3 times in 1 year, and that's it. And, that's very valuable information to have, right? Or, they're like, there's a 10-word list and you have to do blah, blah, blah with it. And then you find out, well, they gave this child the same 10-word list 16 times. And now he's mastered it because he memorized the list, or she memorized the list. So
never underestimate the workarounds that a student will, that will use in order to like try to succeed at school.
And, I find like the data on FBAs and behavior is usually completely a mess, and you can really trip up and, twist and their BCBA into a knot, just trying to explain what this means, or whether it was, data taken with fidelity or whatever. It's
because obviously, like when you're taking the data, and this is the thing that I always think about, particularly with behavioral data, it's like, who's taking the data and what are they doing? It's like, if it's the classroom teacher and they're minding 24 other kids and also trying to take this data, it's like, is it going to be completely accurate? I don't think so. I mean,
or you'll find out that they fill out the form at the end of the week.
Yep, exactly.
They're not taking it as the day, as those things are happening. They're like, oh, let's see what happened this week,
Like, well, maybe 5 times he did this, and you don't have any way to know what the antecedent to that behavior was, or any of the important, things about like what was going on there. So that's always really, really important. Although I know that, the tenor of this discussion is, is discouraging to probably discouraging to families, but it's, I think, I mean, I know that a lot of our families, when, during COVID, which is obviously a very bad time for everybody, when they had their kids at home and they were watching them do the work, they saw what mastery did or didn't mean. And I think that was a real, a real wake-up call. But we don't have COVID. Kids are still in school, are in school. But this is still something that you can kind of replicate, you can try to see it, when you work with them, maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes a night to see, are they mastering the things that they're, that they're supposed to be, doing at school, mastering at school. So that's another.
If the school is saying, oh yeah, they're reading fluently at a 3rd grade level, give them a 3rd grade book and surreptitiously record them while they're reading it. You can generate your own data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or have them write, because a dyslexic student, especially severely dyslexic student, cannot spell. They usually can't even spell phonetically. So like I'll sit at a PPT and be told like how great and then I'll just call up I'm like, can anybody read this? Anybody? And I'm just like, have everybody take a look. And it's like, and I'll have like 5 of them, and it just kind of look away. But you can obviously, And I'm not saying all school districts are bad. I was told we have selection bias. We're only dealing with
most of them.
No, of course.
The good ones aren't gonna, they're not gonna need us.
The success stories don't walk in our office.
They don't.
So we have a bias.
Well, it's the 1%, or the 5% or whatever it is. It's definitely the ones that are, there's definitely that bias in what we're talking about. It doesn't mean it's not real. It just, means that, you're only going to see the cases that are the most extreme, which is my case as well, for sure. Let's move on to the second piece, of this, of the the outplacement train, you know, the evaluation. Can you two talk about the evaluation, what it is, its role in, you know, in the outplacement process, in the special education journey in general, and how do you know that, you know, you've got a good, you know, eval to like, you know, to move forward with?
So I'll start, and then, you know, Meredith jump in. I don't mean to keep going first. You
No,
can
no,
jump
it's
in.
fine.
Okay.
So the evaluation is key. I won hearings by the skin of my teeth without an evaluation? Yes, but I always had some kind of expert in the room, but it is so much easier. And I did end up in litigation, right? Because I didn't have an evaluation. And yes, we won the placement, but it takes time and money. The evaluation is huge, and it has to be a skilled evaluator who is neutral and willing to put in writing if they believe a child needs an outplacement. And I tell parents to ask the evaluators up front, because there's a series of evaluators who will say, we will never put that in writing. And if that's your you're not
What
going
won't they put in writing, Courtney?
that the child needs an outplacement. They
Any
will
kind of
blatantly
outplacement. They will never put that.
Any kind of outplacement. There's one particular practice that practices that way, but then there's other people too. So I always say ask. I would say you want somebody who's not going to just yes you to death or yes the school to death. That's totally child-centered and is not afraid to lose school business, right? Like that's huge for me. So it's somebody that I trust. There's very few that I feel are truly, truly neutral and unafraid. I've heard from evaluators on the side that they get called up by special ed directors and ripped to pieces. How dare you put that in? You know what I mean? And asking them to change their evaluations, like really shady things that go on. So you need somebody who can withstand that, right? Somebody whose ego is not going to be trashed for that. So you want somebody strong, somebody credible, somebody with at least a PhD, obviously. Medical doctors are not helpful, which is ironic, right? Because they went to medical school. They are completely not helpful. The pediatrician letters are usually horrible. So you're looking for a psychologist, a neuropsychologist, sometimes a psychiatrist, and that evaluation will look at the student as a whole and say, okay, this is their cognitive functioning, this is their achievement, their executive functioning, this is all of the pieces of this student. Is this a student who can be in a mainstream program, for example, or is this a student who's been benefiting from the program that's been in place? What does the student need now? What's expected that could happen, right? They don't spell that out like super clear. And then that evaluator is basically saying to the school district, these are all the reasons why this child needs a tiny classroom or a psychiatric facility or whatever it is. So that evaluation is key. So when I'm in front of a hearing officer and I'm putting on my expert, they're able to say, this is the scientific data to support what I'm saying. And then there's different rating scales that schools can fill out. And then there's obviously you hold every email the school district ever wrote that could help you, you know what I mean? And you build it that way. But evaluations are key. I don't know if you want to wait for this, but you asked about IEEs versus independent evaluations. If you want me to just
well, let's hold that for a second and hold that thought, and then
so you know, I also, you know, you want to make sure that they're making recommendations in addition to, you know, the out of district placement if they think that that's warranted. Because it's helpful if you have very specific recommendations for what that child needs to make progress. If they can criticize the IEP, that's even better. And some evaluators out there aren't just a PhD, they are also, you know, former employees of school districts, so they have some of that cred, you know, to do that. But you also have to be careful. There's a few evaluators out there who, you know, when I look at their evaluations, I'm like, a lot of times I'll feel like they're kind of light on the testing. And then often I will see that there's, you can't trace their recommendations and conclusions back to the testing that they did or the record review that they did. And you know, it makes that evaluation very vulnerable, and not helpful for you. Also, if they wind up with a lot of typos, like with the wrong child's name in there or stuff like that, that's always not helpful. So, you know, I always ask if they're, you know, it's not a requirement, but if they're willing to let us see the evaluation before they, sort of finalize it,
Mhm.
which is probably not possible in an IEE situation, which we'll talk about, but if you're paying, they should be willing to do that. And like, when I look at an evaluation in draft form, I don't ask them to change any of their testing or conclusions, but I may ask them to strengthen some of their language,
Mhm.
because all of them default to this would benefit from language,
Yeah.
which doesn't help, right?
Right.
Because,
Everybody would benefit from, yeah.
right, under IDEA, they're not required to do what would benefit the child. They have to do what's required to educate that child.
Right.
So I'll work with them on strengthening their language so that it's clear that this is what this child needs in order to make progress, not just what would be nice in an ideal world for them. Also, I hate it when they divide it into educational recommendations and like private parental recommendations.
Right.
That's a play from school district outside of
Separate
evaluators.
responsibility.
And it doesn't belong in an independent evaluation, because among other things, they don't know the law. They don't know what is the school district's responsibility and what's the parent's responsibility. And opining that way is putting themselves out as a legal expert, which they are not.
Mhm.
So anyway, so
And
those
putting
are
more
my
onus
issues.
on parents.
Independent evaluation.
More onus onto the parents, which is like, you're trying to provide a holistic view of like where the child is, and not, kind of, pick and choose like who's responsible for what. How is a parent supposed to know who's a good evaluator, what tests should be done, what the, because most of us, I've had 7 evaluations, in my, my family. So, so now I'm like fairly good at it, but, it's your first time and it's really, it's really hard. How should a parent go about, trying to figure that out, trying to, delve into, what's appropriate in an evaluation, what's appropriate in testing, how long should the evaluator observe the child in the classroom if that's part of the evaluation? How does a parent, tell that?
I feel like they really need some professional advice to do that. Like they need a skilled lay advocate or an attorney to, talk with about that, because it depends on the child, and
Yeah.
there are different evaluators out there that have different strong suits for
Mhm.
various profiles. And, I can look through a file and say, well, I think they need to observe this class or that class, or you know what I mean? And so I think that's a very hard thing for a parent, coming in from nowhere to know how to do, because they don't know who's out there. They don't know, how good or bad they are. I've had plenty of people go and get an outside evaluation with somebody who's being recommended by other parents,
Yeah.
all over the place. And I'm like, every time I see that evaluator's name, I just want to, throw my hands up. So it's very hard for parents to know without professional advice is the bottom line.
And I would concur. I didn't even know how to answer that, honestly. I mean, it took me years, even with a law degree, to really understand an evaluation and navigate. And, the problem is school districts know how to do this really well. You can evaluate everything but the area of weakness. And there are many, many private neuropsychologists who are on retainer for school districts. And I'm not saying they're being unethical, but their evaluations kind of do the same thing. It's like, well, this is the problem and this is what you tested, right? Like none of this, the kid's dyslexic and you did a basic like woodpecker reading, like it does nothing. And you knew this child was dyslexic. I had somebody that I've used in the past try to say a student was not reading because of a vacation they took in like it was just so crazy.
Oh, wow.
Like they're trying to rationalize this child who's like 7 years behind in reading. And coming up with all these
vacation. Yeah.
Right? It was like all these excuses and
Yeah.
bizarreness and ADHD. And I'm like, well, most of my ADHD kids actually can read just fine. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
but I know that, right?
Yeah.
And I can say 22 years of doing this, and Meredith can say 30 years of doing this. We know one has nothing to do with
That
the other.
old.
Yeah.
And that's the problem I even like I see some Facebook groups and stuff, and
Yeah.
like you said, they'll all be recommending, and I'm like, I can't give legal
Right,
advice.
I wouldn't touch that person with a 10-foot pole, right?
You're going to just flush thousands of dollars down the toilet. So yeah, I would say parents are your best first resource, actually, because they've been through it, that they're wonderful. And then but then you want to double check, make sure you
Because
really
it's so
know.
hard to know what testing should be done. For a layperson, it is really difficult to, to think. It's like, what are we trying to evaluate? Like, what are we looking at? And it's very hard for a parent to know that, So this sort of goes to my next question, which is, where, ideally, when outplacement is the ultimate goal, when should a parent engage an attorney?
Right away. Well, it
Or
depends.
or a good lay advocate, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
Good.
sometimes you don't want them bringing, so if the goal is outplacement, you've already decided that's where you're going. What you don't want to do is help the school district make the IEP better, right?
Right.
Because in a unilateral placement case, you're proving that the IEP is inappropriate, the placement is appropriate, and then there's the equitable piece. So the IEP is inappropriate. That's an easier case to make if the IEP sucks, although you
Right,
don't want
absolutely.
it to be so bad that your kid is really suffering, right?
Right. But you want it to be, you want it to be
right.
bad, because otherwise you're not going to be outplaced.
So so you can get a very good lay advocate who can help you lay that groundwork,
Mhm.
and
help
get,
you with the testing, and and kind of
Yeah.
guide you through that process, because most of
Yeah.
them would know the same thing that you all know,
yeah.
which is like
And-
the good, bad, and
and-
ugly of that process.
Yeah, and a lot of times I'll work with an advocate so that they're coming to me with their questions and I'm sort of directing it behind the scenes. But so if I go to a PPT, the school district brings, if me or Courtney goes to a PPT, the school district brings their attorney. And a lot of times that attorney will help them not make the mistakes they always make, right? And procedural violations are very helpful in
Yeah.
a unilateral placement case. So having a lay advocate there, they don't bring their attorney. You can set some landmines. They often will step in them, and it helps your case. So that's sometimes how I approach it.
Right. It's a strategy. I mean, it's definitely a strategy. It can be hard for parents,
But you should get advice right away. As soon as you think that you want to go
but
to
that's
an
the ultimate goal. You should get some advice.
you need professional advice.
Yeah.
The process isn't quick. And the reason I said right away is
Yeah.
a lot of times it'll be May, and I get a bunch of people who want an outplacement for September.
For September. And that's
we make it happen?
very unlikely. Yeah.
Well, we try, the
It's
best
hard,
we
yeah.
can, but
Which is kind of why we're
people-
doing this webinar now, and even though it's like, well, how bad could it be? It's September, it's like, that is sort of, and, to your point about the advice, it's laying out it's researching the schools, but also getting that data in place and getting the evaluation, kind of teed up. And, because obviously there's a really long wait list now for everybody, everybody is very, very busy. And, it's not uncommon for me to hear, 6, 9, even 12 months or more, in waiting for an appointment for an evaluation. So, it's important to kind of lay that all out, and it's easier if you have some professional guidance that's helping you sort of, figure out what the next steps are, how to construct your case properly. Because that's what it is, you're constructing a case, a legal case. And that's what you always have to kind of think about.
everything. And I will just say about advocates is I work with a handful of phenomenal advocates, and I've taken cases from advocates who do not have the expertise. Like actually, thank God we won the hearing, but they played a tape of the PPT with an advocate who killed the entire case. And I had to
dear.
dance
Right,
and say she's not a lawyer. She didn't have, and
Yeah.
basically did missions and, did all these things. And so just be super cautious. Like I said, there are phenomenal advocates out there, but there is no, we had to go to
I have
law
a
school.
list of advocates who I will, work with. But
yeah.
I think generally if they've been through the COPA, Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates seat training, the special education advocacy training, and have gotten that certificate and done the practicum for that you're probably in pretty good shape. Yeah.
But anyway, you don't want to hire a personal injury attorney to do this, because we've also gotten those cases afterwards.
No,
so if I get a mess, if I get handed a mess, it's much harder than it is.
Or had an attorney call you who you happen to know who's not in this area, and they're like, oh, I took this case and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, what are you doing?
I have a hearing tomorrow, right? I have a hearing tomorrow. Can you tell me how to run it?
Yeah.
This is a very important thing to highlight. And we're laughing about it, but it's actually not funny, because like this is a really complicated field of law, like really complicated. I don't know anything from anyone. I didn't go to law school, as you both know, but I know that, the level, the terms, the procedures, the guidelines, the timelines, like everything is so specific, and it's very difficult for, a lawyer, an attorney that doesn't play in this sandbox all the time to, have real insight. In addition to the fact that they don't know the players and they don't know the school districts, that's a totally different thing. But it's really difficult. It's a really difficult and complicated area of law. So that is my PSA for that. We just getting back to the evaluations. Can you talk about the difference between an IEE, an independent educational evaluation, and I realize that encompasses a lot of things, and you can talk about that, and a private evaluation, and then sort of veer into is which one's better? Is there a preference for either one? That kind of thing.
I have a unique view, and Meredith may not share my view, but IEEs are not always the most helpful part of an IEE is they pay for it for you. But I don't think schools, it's still your person. So I don't think that the schools take it any more seriously than if you had gotten the evaluation yourself. Schools are also more likely to play games and say, okay, no IEE, let's go to hearing, especially if you're not represented. There's some really nasty districts that do that. When you have an attorney like us, we go, okay, fine, take us to hearing, and we're going to sue you for 3 years of comp ed and everything you didn't do, and you're really going to feel bad and wish you had just done the IEE and that they never had to hire us, right? So that we can get them out of that mess.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that I don't ask for them, I do, but I mean, honestly, what I say to a parent, it's gonna be a lot easier for you in certain districts, just get the evaluation. And you have to look at it as like an investment, right? If the school district is recommending an evaluation and their evaluator backs you up, which has happened quite a few times in the past couple of months, shockingly, they kind of have nothing. They have no case. They are done. That's the ideal if you ever get in that situation. Right. But it's not, they're worth asking for. They're not worth going to hearing over. The likelihood of a parent winning those, I don't know. For me,
very low. I've never won one. I've never won one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't take them because I'm like, you'd be paying, you might as well pay me to do the whole FAPE case, right? Let's do the whole case, and then let's just wait, get your evaluation, and we'll do the outplacement, because but if you have a
hard thing
I might ask for an IEE in order to force a negotiation over cost sharing of the evaluation, but that's about the extent of it. And generally they don't take IEEs any more seriously than private evaluations.
That was going to be my next question.
And I don't feel like hearing officers do either. So, and school districts just ignore what everybody outside of their
because all it really means, this is true for a private evaluation as well. They have to look at it, and, and they're looking at it. And the only difference really, they have to consider it. I feel like, what, and I'd be curious as to your experience, but, what a district, pays for an evaluation, for a certain level of evaluation, can also dictate how much gets evaluated. It's like they're not paying for a classroom visit, or they're only paying for this much testing instead, it's like 2 hours instead of 4 hours or whatever. And so that can be kind of dictated by the, what each district, has considered to be, the amount that they're paying for, for an evaluation for neuropsych, for example.
I don't think it gets down to that
No? Okay.
granular level. It's, they have their, we'll pay $5,000 for a neuropsych. It's up to the evaluator to decide what they're going to test and what they're not. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes though. So with an IEE, there's more of an open road between the evaluator and the school district.
Yeah.
And you don't know what kind of games are being played behind the scenes there, if any. So you have to make sure that if you get an IEE and you get them to agree with the person you want, you just need to make sure that person you want is never in the pocket of that school district,
How do you determine that though? I mean, how do you go through that? There's that negotiation that happens. Like sometimes districts will have lists, like these are the people that we use, that's not really that independent. So you're like, I have this, like, so how do you work that out as a parent?
It's kind of the scuttlebutt because, like there are evaluators who started out being very reliable for parent side evaluations, and then they start getting hired more and more often by school districts, and their recommendations start changing. And so 3 years down the line, that's no longer someone you want to use. Yeah, I don't know. Courtney, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, again, it's a trusted person. What you want is somebody who's either been through litigation or knows somebody who's been through litigation, because that's the person who's going to help you with an evaluator. Because you don't just want a warm, fuzzy evaluator or like that was a nice guy. You want somebody who really knows their stuff. And again, it's that whole will not go wishy-washy, will not ever back down. I don't care who's paying me. I'm gonna do what's right. It is hard, but I agree with Meredith. There's been a couple. I told you that one reading evaluator who I was like literally, I mean, I just took one PPT with me going, are you kidding me? And she changed again. She changed in our favor, because I was like, I am gonna call you out on this ridiculousness. But the parent couldn't do that, right? So it can be a crapshoot. There's a couple people that are always board friendly, and a couple people I feel like I can trust to evaluate a child, and sometimes they haven't come down in a way that I would like, but I trust what they were saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there are some who like I know well, and I can pick up the phone and talk to them about a kid. I never will expect them to come out with a certain result or anything like that, but I make sure I feel like they hear me when I talk about what concerns I have and what we're thinking, so, and what you believe it or not, what you never want is an evaluator who says, I'll say whatever you want me to say,
right?
Because you will get a crappy.
No, you want someone that is thinking about the child, and what's appropriate for the child, because the evaluation is a roadmap, basically.
Right.
It's a roadmap to like, it's like where you are and where you want to go and how you get there. And if you don't have an accurate map, how are you going to get to, whatever, your goal is for the kind of, short and medium term,
well, that's it. Like Meredith said, you can't have average achievement scores, average everything, and this child needs an intensive outplacement. I'm like,
right.
Why? Like I can't do anything with this because it looks like, and
look like anything.
It looks like anything. So I'll tell the parent to go back to the evaluator and say, can you tell me why you made this recommendation? And sometimes they can articulate it. Okay, then put that in the report, I have one right now, the kid tests perfectly. They've been getting F's and D's for 3 years. Okay, that's enough. You know what I mean? They don't have to have a learning disability. That's their executive dysfunction. That's their ADHD. And it's having an educational impact. That's enough, but you better point that out or I can't use the information that you have. But it is tricky.
I got an IEE recently where they like this evaluator didn't mention that this kid had been beat up in front, like the thing went out over social media. He was beat up in front of 200 people in front of this, in the school with it being videotaped and the videotape being sold by people and, you know, the kid being
my God.
scared to go back to school. None of that was mentioned in the evaluation.
Oh my God.
And I was like,
What's wrong with you? Yeah, exactly.
yeah, like, how do you defend this? You
Yeah.
know, this is a traumatic event
Yeah.
that had huge, he didn't go back to school that year, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
How do you
But
not?
that's
I did not mention
helpful.
that.
Yeah, that's helpful because then you shoot that down, right? Those things help. Like I always say to parents when they're panicky, and I'm like, the eval is so bad, let it stand, right?
Right.
Let it stand on its own because they're missing the sexual assault, they're missing all the things, and they're just coming to their psychiatric evals are the worst because there's no testing. And honestly, there's very few psychiatrists in the state of Connecticut that I would send any client to. Because you're going to come out with a laundry list of DSM diagnoses, and all of you can be in the public school. 50 different personalities. I had a kid with 50 different personalities. You can be in the public school.
Oh my
Are you
God.
kidding me? Are
Yeah.
you kidding me? So it is a crapshoot. Even with, I have to say, we have very few people I would trust, even with my own child that I would trust, right? Like
Yeah.
it's that bad right now.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they all know eventually they could be on the stand, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
It's hard
they're-
because I think that a lot of, you know, a lot of this is not to like disparage anybody, but I think a lot of evaluators, like, you know, they want the nice evaluation. You know, they want the one that's like, you know, it's like, oh, this is going to be private placement. They're going to put their kid, you know, whatever. And they're not going to be expected to, you know, to testify. There's not that, you know, that element of, you know, of that. So I feel like that does have, you know, that, I mean, and that's, you know, not a knock on anyone, you know, I mean, you know, I get it, you know, it's, you know, it's stressful. It's, you know, it's difficult to, you know, to do that kind of work. So I hear that. So, let's, you know, in our scenario that we're laying out, this family has, you know, done all the right things. We have, you know, they've engaged with advice early. They laid out sort of a plan. They gathered the data. They researched the schools. They got the evaluation. The evaluation recommends an outplacement to the school that they had been researching. Now we're in a PPT meeting. Tell me about how that process would work.
I think Meredith said it so well. It's not the time to fix. You're past the time of fixing, right? School wants to fix now because you're going to be making the request, right? So what parents have to do is listen with an open mind. So you do have to, what are you offering? How big is the class size? Like get all the info. Can I observe it? You know, if it's, you know, I always call the alternative dumping grounds that schools have. They just put them in the alternative classroom. We tuck everybody away and we just give them worksheets all day and hope for the best, right? Like, let me go see. And then
you have to look at it. You have to
look at it.
You have to visit it. Yeah.
Right. Otherwise a hearing officer is going to slam you. Right.
Yeah.
So as a parent, so you're asking all the questions, but, you know, usually if I'm attending that PPT, I'm saying, look, this parent's been telling you what's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they didn't just come to me. Right. Like, and I'll list all of the areas of weakness. You know, it used to be, they'd be like, well, tell me which goal and objective. Nobody does that anymore. You know, it's just ridiculous. And it's like, we've heard what you said. And basically there's such a disconnect between what this child needs and what you've just offered, right? So at this point, we are requesting an outplacement, comp ed, whatever it is, reimbursement for an eval. So it's just going into that PPT. Again, you don't want to go in going, I want Pinnacle, I want Winston Prep, I want Bill, you know, you don't go into it with that because then you are closed up. Just like they're not supposed to go in knowing that
you're supposed to make this decision as a team.
Right. We know they already know.
Don't make a face at me, Meredith.
They predetermined every single time.
They're all predetermined. And in fact, I have a case on appeal right now, and it's kind of shocking. So it's an Ann Bird case where the federal judges don't like overturning hearing officers, but he remanded it to her and said basically like, yeah, it does look like they predetermined it. By the way, it also looks like they didn't actually read the evaluations lady go try to justify it, you know? Yeah. So that's helpful. That's like, that was surprising.
Is that your one about the no deference to the hearing officer? Is that decision?
Yeah. So it went to federal court, and he kind of did what he should have done, because this particular hearing officer basically just copies the IEP and like spells it all out and does nothing. And then it's net, but then like always sides with boards. Like I've won with her a couple of times, but normally sides with boards. And this federal judge really was very
I got
thoughtful.
wilderness from her once.
Yeah,
Oh,
I got 3 years of Ben bronze from her and a laptop. I'm like, I don't understand, but most of the time it's a no. And in this case, she was
yeah.
wrong. You know, she really almost gave this kid a death sentence because it
Yeah.
was a medical fragility case.
Oh my God.
And this hearing officer, I mean, this judge did. So he remanded it to Ann Bird. She basically said, I was right the first time, and now we're back.
Oh,
You know,
God.
I don't know that he's going to overturn. It's so hard to get a hearing officer's decision overturned.
Yeah.
But it's good case law in the meantime until we
Yeah.
have a
Oh, it's
decision.
lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, that
So-
says they clearly went into this.
Yeah.
We're not going to consider it.
But back to the PPT though, the approach is a little different if your client can't do the unilateral placement, because I mean, that takes
That's what I'm
serious bucks, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to really force a placement from the school district, then you do want to load up the IEP with everything that this kid needs. You want to try to get them to agree to do everything that this evaluator is saying that child needs, and then you point out that there's no way you can implement that in this school.
Yeah.
You need that outplacement.
Yeah, it's like the IP stuffed with everything.
Yeah,
and you don't have enough hours in the day to like make
Yeah.
this work, or you don't have the staff or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So let's say in that, you're at PPT, you've got your data, you've got your evaluation, you ask for the placement, the outplacement to whatever XYZ school. Obviously there, the happy and good scenario is they say yes, and everybody's kind of off to the races. What do you do when they say no? I say when they say no, but you know what I mean. When they say no, you've asked for outplacement and we're denying your request. What's the strategy at that point?
Yeah. Depends where, if you have an attorney, obviously they handle that for you.
Right.
But you always go to mediation. You always try mediation. You have some parents that are like, I'm not even gonna negotiate. And you're like, okay, well, you're looking at 6 months to a year of very expensive litigation when we're probably going to be able to settle your case. But the next step is, sometimes we just file for due process just to make it very clear what's happening.
To force
and then
to force mediation, basically.
Force mediation, because more and more districts are, being difficult about it. But yeah, mediation would be your next step, and you want to do it fairly quickly. You want to get that process going. You can request mediation right after the PPT.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, a lot of times, my advice is, if you're doing a unilateral placement, to wait a few months after the child has started that new placement, just to make sure that it's a fit and that it's working, because you don't want to enter into a settlement agreement and then
have to move the child. Right.
On you. So I usually counsel to wait a few months.
Mm-hmm.
But also when you're in that PPT, you should make sure to put on the record and make sure they acknowledge they're going to put it in their records that you disagree with the IEP, and think it's denying your child a free appropriate public education. So that should be part of the record.
Mm-hmm.
Or on the prior written notice. Yeah, I tend to push things fast. It's just me, but that makes sense. If you have a client who can afford to do that, most of my clients, I mean, yes, I certainly have clients.
I know.
It
Totally depends on the cash flow, right?
Yeah.
And what they can bear. But if you, especially if I'm worried about whether that placement's going to work for that child, I mean, because there are things like, there are a couple
have the
schools.
cohort, the kids could be wrong. Just a lot of things can happen, that where it just, the placement doesn't work. It can look like the perfect fit, but you don't know until you get there.
Yeah, and there are a couple schools where their program has changed significantly in the last couple of years, and so their sort of lens for who their
Child is.
Their school is changing, or it's narrowing, or it's expanding, and I don't always know whether it's really going to be a fit.
Yeah.
And I've had lately, I think too many places are taking too many kinds of kids. So I've had some really bad situations for schools that I will never, ever refer kids to. So all of a sudden they're home, and some of these kids are just in the ER, right? They're in, home, and it's been quite a quite an interesting time. I've actually also had more cases where I think districts are doing more outplacements. I've had more cases where I'm fighting against an outplacement, which for me is like, I can sleep through that. That's the easiest case in the world, right? Unless the kid brought a gun to school, I can make them keep him in the mainstream, right? And even then, but you know what I mean? It's a lot of times if in that situation, I'm counseling the client that public school is probably not the best fit, but you know, so it is an interesting time. I have to say,
I think it's important for parents, you know, to understand that like, there's not necessarily going to be a perfect school for their child, you know, and that's, you know, I mean, even like, you know, and that is not even saying like, you know, when your kid's like got this really specific medical, you know, like thing or whatever, it's like very often, you know, the school's only going to be 70% of what you want it to be, and you just have to make it work. You know, and that just sort of is what it is. You know, there isn't always going to be a good placement, you know, and that's tough.
Yeah, or you
We're
could
in a
have,
great part of the country for this.
yeah,
You
we
know,
really are.
we really are. We have like
Yeah.
families have a lot of options, like, and even more than, you know, when I was started doing this, you know, with my son, you know, going on, you know, 15 years ago. But it does not mean just because it doesn't necessarily follow that there's going to be like that perfect, you know, kind of fit for your kid. You know,
And,
sometimes
you know,
it's gotta-
and it could be if your child is really well connected socially, you know, has solid social connections in their school. Um, you know, it might be worth thinking about just supplementing with outside services, you know, to get what they need if, you know, if
Yeah.
there's no school out there that would really, you know, make the difference for them. So
or bring in consultants. I've been doing that a lot lately. For parents,
yeah.
like we'll have them pay for an OG tutor to come in lieu of reading class. You know what I mean? And
Right,
it's a really
right.
good one. Or
Mm.
CCSN does BCBA consults, and they're really, really good. And we'll
Yeah.
bring their whole team in and try to make it work if we can. I agree 100%. That is a big thing. If the kid is happy and they're socially
Yeah.
connected,
Yeah.
and their issues aren't so big they can't possibly be remediated. And it depends on the grade too, because in third grade it's going to be different than in seventh grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
The
look
social
at
piece is really important. You know, it is like the third leg on that stool. You know, it's like the social, the academic, and the behavioral, like, and all that, you know, kind of, you know, interconnecting with each other. So
And with those outside services though, just to add a point here, I still have the parents do a unilateral, a notice of providing services unilaterally.
oh,
So,
interesting.
you know, yeah, so you tell the school district, I asked you for this, you wouldn't give it to me. My
I'm
child needs
doing
this.
this. Yeah, I'm gonna
Right.
do it
My
anyway.
child needs this for an appropriate education, so I'm providing it and I expect you to reimburse me. And then you have a
And
reimbursement.
then you
for
have the
those
right
outside services.
established.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I had not
yeah.
thought
And
of
if you
that.
do an agreement for that though, I always like to have a fallout clause, because what happens is a parent, like, I'll know this kid needs an outplacement, but I'm the lawyer. That's not my job. I'm going to give you my opinion.
Mhm.
And the parent's like, no, I think they just need this. And I'm like, well, they have like no working memory, no process, their, you know, and they're dyslexic. And so I always have in there like that the parent can pull the plug and then argue for an outplacement at that point in time, because otherwise, like, you could enter a 2-year agreement for private services, and then you're stuck if it doesn't work.
No,
And
it's
schools love that because it's never as expensive as an outplacement, right? Even if you max it out. So it's always, that's again why a really good advocate or an attorney who's, and there's enough of us who are skilled in this field to be thinking of all of those things before you enter into a contract, because again, sometimes people come to me and I can't get them out of a contract.
No, exactly. And that's an important thing to, you know, to know, is like, you know, is like, first of all, you know, attorneys and advocates are not, you know, magicians, and, you know, you can't wave a wand and make, you know, and make magic happen. You know, very often, you know, you can only work with what you have, you know, so it's really important for the foundations of whatever it is you are trying to do, whether it be outplacement, whether it be, you know, whatever it is, be established, you know, like really, you know, pretty early on, you know, before you start going down the road and, you know, potentially making a mistake that can't be undone, you know, in that process, you know,
like
so,
making the placement, paying for it without notice, because
exactly.
it's not that you could never get reimbursement, but you could lose a lot of time.
Right. And it's hard. It's definitely hard. Well, I have, really enjoyed this conversation and this dialogue with the two of you. I think we could have a whole other webinar on mediation and all the other, things that we touched on. But I just want to thank you both for this really, really invigorating conversation, and and sharing your expertise with our community once again. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Courtney. And I just want to say good night and thank you to everyone that joined.
And thank you
Right.
for having
Thanks
us.
a lot.
Thank
Absolutely.
you for all that you do.
Oh,
Yes.
thanks. Be well.
Love so.
Good night.
Good night.